The air was cold when the dropship landed on the edge of the Black Mountains, snow falling like ash from the gray clouds above the human engineer. Jace stepped out slowly, his boots sinking into the soft powder around him, his breath visible in the air. His eyes scanned the frozen base ahead. The outpost looked abandoned walls, damaged lights flickering, and no sound except the wind. He adjusted the strap of his backpack and moved forward, hoping someone was still alive. Here he entered the main hall, the steel doors creaking open inside. It was dim and silent, except for the hum of a backup generator. Then a voice echoed from the shadows. Rough, sharp, and full of distrust. "Who are you, and what are you doing in my sector?" Jace turned and saw her standing on the second-floor railing, pointing a plasma spear at him. Her skin was silver blue, her eyes glowing like twin stars, and her long, dark hair tied back under a military hood. She wore battle armor scuffed from fights, and her stance was not welcome in Jim. "Jace, human engineer sent from Earth," he said calmly. "Command said your defense grid needed upgrades." She jumped down without warning, landing in front of him like a cat, her boots thudding against the metal floor. "I didn't ask for help," she snapped. "We don't need babysitting from soft humans." She moved past him, brushing his shoulder, and began inspecting her weapon. He watched her with quiet interest, knowing this wasn't going to be easy. She walked with pride, every movement trained and ready to strike, but something in her eyes told him more than her words. She was tired, worn out, maybe even scared. Not that she would admit it. She walked to a control panel and slammed her hand on it. Lights flickered alive, showing a partial map of the valley tunnels surrounding them, and motion sensors blinking red. Jace stepped forward and studied the data calmly. "Your perimeter's been breached 4 times this week. If I don't upgrade your system, you'll be overrun by whatever's crawling out there." She narrowed her eyes and leaned closer, her breath visible between them. "If something comes, I'll handle it. I don't need help from someone who hides behind tech." Jace didn't flinch. He pulled out a small scanner and plugged it into the panel. Data streamed across his wristpad, and he pointed at a heat signature near the northern ridge. It was moving slow, circling, not animal movement. She looked at it, her jaw tightening, then looked away. "Fine, fix your systems. Just stay out of my way." For hours they worked in silence. He moved between control hubs, repairing wires, adjusting signal towers, and rebooting sensors. She trained in the yard, launching spears at rusted drones, never missing once. As night fell, Jace set up a small campfire outside the bunker, the flames flickering gently in the wind. He offered her a thermal bar. She shook her head. "I hunt. I don't eat processed junk." Jace nodded and looked at the stars above. Too many to count, they reminded him how small he was in this galaxy, and yet here he was, face to face with a warrior who wanted nothing to do with him. But he didn't come here to win her approval, only to make sure she stayed alive. Suddenly the wind changed sharp, and suddenly he looked toward the valley. Something moved in the dark, something tall with thin limbs and glowing red slits. 4 eyes. Kara stood instantly, spear in hand, her eyes locked on the shape. Jace pulled up his scanner. It was jamming his signals. Nothing showed up then. The lights around the bunker flickered once, twice, and went out. Darkness swallowed them. The only sound was the crunching of snow, approaching slowly from the ridge. Kara didn't speak this time, her body tense as a wire. She motioned for Jace to stay down. He crouched beside her, heartbeat pounding. Something was coming, and neither of them knew if it could be stopped, or if tonight would be the last for both of them. The sky turned dark red, as morning never came cold. Winds blew through the valley, while silence drowned the broken sensors. The lights inside the bunker flickered back to life, barely enough to see anything clearly. Kara stood near the door, her armor slightly scratched, her eyes fixed on the ridge, where they had seen movement last night. Jace sat beside the main console, typing code to reroute the defense grid, still trying to understand what jammed their system. It was unlike anything he had seen before, not natural, not known. Kara threw on her coat and tightened the strap of her spear. Without a word, she marched toward the exit. Jace looked up and asked, "Where are you going?" But she didn't stop, only muttered something about scouting the perimeter alone. He stood to follow, but she turned sharply. "Stay here, your tech won't help out there, and I work better alone." Her voice was firm. No fear, just that same cold edge she always carried. Jace sighed but didn't argue. He watched her vanish into the white fog outside. Time crawled by like an injured animal. Jace worked on the console, rewiring circuits, checking satellite relays, and trying to break through the jamming field. Something was watching them, something intelligent, but cruel. He could feel it, deep in his spine. After 30 minutes he picked up a signal, a weak one from Kara's tracker. Her heart rate had spiked, fast moving, then slowing, then spiking again. He tried to boost the feed, but the screen just glitched and froze. Suddenly a loud thud hit the door. Jace jumped to his feet, reaching for the emergency switch. It opened slowly, steam hissing from the sides. Kara stumbled in, covered in black sludge, Her armor cracked in 2 places, her hands shaking. She collapsed near the table, breathing hard and holding her side. He rushed to her and asked what happened, but she only looked at him with glassy eyes. "They're not beasts, they're hunters," she whispered. "They're testing us, playing with us." Jace helped her to the chair and pulled off her broken shoulder guard. Underneath was a deep bruise, not a cut. Something hit her with brute force. Not claws, not blades, just raw strength. She tried to stand again, but her knees buckled, and she landed back in the seat with a frustrated growl. "I told you I don't need help," she said weakly, but her fingers clutched his jacket without letting go. Outside, the wind picked up again, this time carrying a sound like laughter, twisted, distorted, and echoing across the snow. Kara grabbed her spear and tried to move, but Jace held her back. "You need rest or you won't survive the next hit." She looked at him, breathing hard, and for once did not fight his words. The sensors blinked red again, motion at the rear entrance. Something fast, something big, and coming straight for them. Jace grabbed a blaster from the wall and handed her a backup power core. She clipped it into her spear and stood straighter, wincing from the pain. They moved together, now side by side, heading through the hallway toward the back gate. Sparks flickered from loose wires, the metal walls cold to the touch as they reached the rear bay doors. They heard it breathing on the other side, slow and deep, like it didn't fear them. Kara held her spear tightly and signaled for Jace to stay close, not behind but beside her. She was still the warrior, but now she accepted his presence. Without words, the door burst inwards. Something large crawled in, hunched over but fast. It had no face, only a pulsing red core in its chest and arms like branches, reaching out. Kara charged first, her battle cry fierce and sharp. Her spear sliced through its limbs, but they grew back, twisting and reforming like smoke. Jace fired at the core, but the bullets bounced off. Kara got knocked back. The thing lifted her and threw her against the wall before it turned to Jace, reaching out with its shadowy hand. Jace didn't run. He grabbed a broken cable and jammed it into the wall, triggering a burst of electric energy. The surge hit the creature, making it scream in a voice that rattled the walls. It staggered and hissed, then vanished into the floor like mist. Kara crawled back to him, blood on her lip, breathing fast. Her fingers dug into his back as she whispered, "I told you I don't need help, but I didn't mean it, not really," and she didn't let go. Even as alarms began to blare again, warning of more movement outside. The walls trembled as the alert continued, screaming through the halls, red lights flashing across steel panels, and cold breath hanging in the air. Kara stood with her spear half broken, her legs shaking, but her eyes still burning with fight. Jace grabbed a fresh power cell and shoved it into the backup turret system, his hands moving fast. Despite the adrenaline in his chest, he looked at Kara, but she avoided his gaze like she was trying to forget how tightly she had clung to him moments ago. Outside, the snowstorm raged harder than before, wind howling like a living thing, as if the planet itself was warning them to leave. Kara paced near the door, ignoring the cut across her forehead, while her grip tightened on the spear again. "We kill it next time," she said, without emotion, not fear, not anger, just cold resolve. Jace nodded and pointed to the holomap, multiple red dots closing in around their base, too many for 2 people, even one as skilled as Kara. They moved quickly through the halls, setting up auto-turrets, rigging corridors with plasma charges, and sealing unused exits. Every second felt like an hour, and every noise sounded like claws on metal. Kara refused to rest, despite Jace insisting on checking her wounds again. She pushed his hand away and said, "I can stand, I can fight, I always do." He didn't argue, but his eyes held something else, something softer than she wanted to see. The first creature came through the east tunnel, fast and crawling on walls, its arms like wet branches, eyes glowing from deep sockets. Jace hit the switch, and the turret fired, but the thing kept coming. Kara rushed in without hesitation, striking it through the chest, only for it to split apart and reform behind her. It lunged, but Jace tackled her out of the way just in time. The creature hissed and backed off, vanishing into the vent like smoke, chased by light. Kara stared at Jace, breathless, her chest rising fast, her eyes wide for the first time, with something other than pride. They returned to the main room, barely speaking, both covered in ash and cuts. Kara sat near the central panel and let her spear rest across her lap. "I fought wars before," she said after a long pause, "but this feels different. These things watch us like they know us better than we know them." Jace handed her a ration bar and sat beside her, not too close, but not far either, his voice low. "Maybe they do, maybe that's what makes them dangerous. Not teeth, not claws, but the mind behind them." She looked at him then, her gaze softer than before. She opened her mouth to say something, but the alarm screamed again, this time louder, stronger, shaking the very floor they stood on, dozens of red marks, now all converging from every direction. Jace ran to the console, and Kara followed both, knowing there was no time left for planning. The first wall exploded inward, metal and snow flying like shrapnel. Two creatures charged through their bodies, made of writhing shadows. Kara jumped in front of Jace, knocking one back with a lightning strike from her spear. The other slammed into Jason, threw him against the wall. Kara roared and leaped onto its back, jabbing again and again, until it melted into the ground. She rushed to Jace, who lay dazed and bleeding from his head. Her hands grabbed his jacket and pulled him behind cover, her body shielding him from the next blast. "I said I don't need help," she whispered, but her arms wrapped around him tighter than ever, her heart pounding against his back as she refused to let him go. When the creature appeared again, her grip only grew stronger. Her legs pressed against his sides as she pulled him behind a collapsed beam, refusing to move until the noise faded and the hallway was empty again. After the attack, they sat in silence, her arms still locked around him, her voice quieter now, barely above a whisper. "I was trained to be strong. I was told weakness gets people killed, but when I saw you fall, I felt something break, and I didn't want to feel it, but I did, and now I can't unfeel it." Jace said nothing, only reached up and touched her arm gently, not to move her but to show he didn't mind her being there. The base was broken, walls cracked, lights gone, but the fire inside them still burned. Kara sat beside Jace, her spear resting nearby, her armor cracked but her eyes alive. They knew the enemy would come again, but for now, in this quiet moment, she allowed herself to stay close, not as a warrior, not as a soldier, but as someone who finally realized that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face it all alone. The silence after the battle was heavy, like a blanket of ash and snow, covering everything. Broken metal, sparks dripping from the walls, shadows moving but not attacking. Kara sat with her knees pulled close, her armor smeared with black streaks, her eyes not on Jace, not on the wounds, but staring at something far away, something buried behind her breath. Jace patched the busted cable near the main panel, his fingers steady, even as his body ached from bruises and close calls. He watched her from the corner of his eye, waiting for her to speak. But she didn't, not for a long time. Finally, she whispered, not looking up. "I watched them die, my whole squad. They screamed for help, but I told them to stay quiet, to stand tall, to fight like warriors." She clenched her fists until her knuckles turned white. "They listened to me, they trusted me, and they died one by one. I kept telling them to hold the line." Jace didn't interrupt. He let her voice fill the broken room, her words low and rough, like gravel under boots. "I dragged my commander's body back to the outpost," she continued, "and they called me a survivor, but I wasn't a survivor. I was the reason they didn't come back. I trained harder, I fought harder. I told myself I'd never need anyone again, because needing someone got people killed." Her voice cracked, but she swallowed it down like glass, and still refused to look at him. Jace stood and walked to her side, sitting quietly, without a word, his presence not loud, not heavy, just there like gravity. Kara finally turned her head and looked at him, her eyes not glowing now, just tired maybe. "You should go when the next supply ship comes. You're not a soldier, and you don't deserve to die because of me." Jace looked at her and said calmly, "I'm not leaving because you think you're a curse, and I didn't come here to babysit. I came because this outpost needed saving, and now that includes you." She scoffed and looked away, but her voice was quieter than before. "You're strange for a human. Most of your kind run from us or try to tame us." Jace smiled a little, not a joke, not a victory, just warmth. "Maybe I'm strange, maybe I just see a warrior who's tired of pretending she doesn't bleed." To Kara's jaw tightened, and her fingers brushed the edge of his sleeve without thinking. That sensors buzzed again, and both turned as the hologram lit up a new signal, fast moving straight toward the base. Only one dot this time, but it was pulsing brighter than the others, almost as if it was bait. Kara stood and picked up her spear, her strength returning with every step. Jace grabbed his pulse rifle and followed without hesitation. They moved through the west corridor, silent and ready, the lights above flickering like nervous eyes. Something was out there, something that wanted them separated. Kara moved ahead, and Jace kept close, but not too close, giving her space, but never leaving her flank unguarded. As they reached the outer bay door, they saw it standing tall, and still, its body made of shadows like the others, but its core brighter, its form more solid, like it had evolved, like it was watching them long enough to learn. Kara didn't wait this time. She charged with a cry, sharp and clear, slamming her spear into the creature's chest. It staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it wrapped its long arms around her and began to pull tight. Jace fired again and again, but the bullet seemed to pass through it, as if it existed in two places at once. Kara gasped, her spear dropping and her feet leaving the ground. Jace dropped the rifle and sprinted forward, grabbing a metal beam from the wall and jamming it into the creature's side. It screeched and twisted, throwing Kara aside and turning on him with a roar. But Kara rolled to her knees and lunged back, her fingers glowing with energy she hadn't shown before. She slammed her hand into its core, releasing a pulse so powerful it cracked the walls and shattered the lights. The creature fell writhing into mist and vanished, leaving a silence that echoed louder than noise. Jace fell to one knee, breathing hard. Kara crawled to his side, and for a second their hands touched, her voice shaking. I felt it reading me, using my past against me like it knew my regrets. Jace gripped her hand tighter and said, "Then let's not give it more to use." Kara stared at him, her heart pounding, not from fear, but something deeper, something sharp and warm, something she had buried under years of war and guilt. She didn't let go this time, didn't pull away, just leaned into him, eyes closed, just for a second. Just enough to remember that she was still alive, and not alone, and for the first time in years. She didn't feel like a curse, she felt human again. The fire flickered low in the command room, casting long shadows across the walls, while wind howled outside like something was screaming through the cold. Kara sat near the center, her arms crossed, her body wrapped in a thermal cloak, but her eyes never stopped moving, scanning every corner, every flicker of motion, her breath slow and deep like a storm held inside. Jace sat across from her, his leg bandaged, his left hand still shaking from the earlier pulse blast, yet his eyes were calm, watching her, not with fear or judgment, but with something she couldn't quite name. The creature had been stronger, smarter, it knew her, it had whispered things only she knew. It had tried to pull her apart with memories instead of claws. Now every creak of metal made her twitch, but she didn't show it, didn't let herself fall into the hole she once lived in. Jace tossed a data chip onto the table, showing the surrounding map, red blips, blinking closer each hour, their numbers growing, and their pattern shifting. They're adapting, he said softly. Each wave is testing us, learning our response. We don't have long before they stop playing. Kara stood, stretched her back, and walked over. Without a word, she leaned on the table, her face close to the hologram, her finger tracing one of the dots. They know on the stronger fighter, but they keep targeting you, she said, almost like a question. Jace looked up at her and smiled. Maybe they think I'm the easier prey, or maybe they know you care. He didn't say it like a trap, didn't say it to challenge, just truth spoken without armor. She stared at him long and hard, then turned away, muttering something under her breath, but didn't leave his side. Instead, she sat beside him, closer than before, not for warmth, not for comfort, but for presence. The base creaked again, and Kara's hand brushed his shoulder by accident. She didn't move it for a second, and when she did, she looked at her fingers like they had betrayed her. He didn't speak, just gently tapped the console, showing the latest update. One of the creatures was inside the perimeter. They both stood at once. Weapons drawn, movements synchronized without words, as if some invisible thread had started connecting them step by step. Moved through the west corridor, shadows dancing on the walls from emergency lights, the cold biting through their armor, the silence too deep to trust. As they passed the storage unit, Kara froze, her eyes narrowing. A drop of black liquid hit the floor in front of her. They looked up and saw it, clinging to the ceiling, its limbs wrapped around pipes, its red eyes glowing as it dropped without sound. Kara pushed Jace to the side and rolled forward, slamming her spear upward, slicing through the creature's arm. But it didn't scream, it didn't bleed, it just morphed around her weapon and tried to pull her in. Jace fired from behind, hitting the creature's core and causing it to stagger. Then Kara spun low and drove the spear into its cliff while Jace jumped in and shoved a thermal charge into the core. They dove back as it exploded in light and steam, leaving a sticky mess behind them, panting. Jace leaned against the wall. Kara dropped beside him, her breath fast, her hand clutching his shoulder. Without thinking, he looked at her and said, "You're okay," and she nodded once, then leaned her forehead against his shoulder, just for a second. Just long enough for the cold to slip away. She whispered something he couldn't hear, something soft and foreign, before pulling back, her face unreadable again. Back in the command room, she sat on the bench near the long window, her body quiet, her mind racing. "I thought if I stayed cold, if I kept everyone away, I'd never feel that pain again," she said without looking at him. "But you keep getting hurt for me, and I don't know how to stop caring." Jace sat beside her, their arms touching. And he said, "Maybe you don't have to stop. Maybe it's not weakness. Maybe it's survival." Tooth alarm buzzed once, but they didn't move, not yet. Kara looked at him, really looked at him, and her voice came out steady. "If we die tomorrow, I want you to know I stopped pretending for you, just for now." Jace nodded and placed his hand over hers, not as a soldier, not as an engineer, but as someone who chose to stand in front of death and still care. Kara didn't pull away, didn't joke, didn't run. She leaned in just enough to let him know that even if the monsters came, even if the world burned, she wouldn't face it without him again. The snow had stopped falling, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the cold that came before. The valley lay still, like the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for the final move, waiting for the last scream. Kara stood on the edge of the bunker roof, her eyes scanning the white landscape now marked with burned scars and broken steel. The creatures had pulled back, but not out. They circled in the distance, watching, waiting, testing. The defenses like predators studying wounded prey. Jace climbed the ladder behind her with a toolkit slung across his back and a fresh bandage wrapped around his ribs, his breath visible as he handed her a heat core for her armor. She didn't thank him, but her fingers brushed his hand a second. Longer than needed. The sky above was dark, no sun, no stars, just endless gray, and the distant thump of movement. Underground sensors showed over 200 lifeforms approaching from every side. Too many for guns, too many for tricks. Jace finished calibrating the last turret and pulled up the schematic map on his wrist screen. If they come from the west ridge, we have maybe 4 minutes before they hit the gate. If they split and flank us from both tunnels, 2 minutes, maybe less. Kara didn't respond. She was staring at something far off, something only she could see. Her lips moved, and Jace barely caught the words. I promised I wouldn't need anyone, and now I can't fight without you. She turned her head slowly and looked at him, her eyes not glowing but raw, her voice calm but heavy. I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you. Jace stepped closer, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said, we fight together, or we fall together. No more running, no more pretending. They stood in silence for one long breath, then nodded as one, and descended the ladder together, their hands brushing as they moved like twin sparks flickering in the dark inside the main bunker. They activated the last defense sequence, traps, mines, pulse fields, and manual override locks. The generator groaned, but held. The lights dimmed, but stayed on. Kara moved with purpose, barking commands at the automated systems, while Jace sealed the northern hallway with a blast door reinforced by plasma welds. The sound of digging came from beneath them, slow, steady like teeth gnawing at the earth. Kara tightened her grip on her spear. Jace readied the modified blaster they had built from broken parts and old tech. The first breach came with a shriek. The wall behind the storage bay exploded inward, and 3 creatures poured in, black mist swirling from their bodies. Kara struck first, her spear slicing clean through one, while Jace fired into the others, forcing them back. They didn't scream, they didn't bleed, they just melted and reformed, shifting shapes and tactics. Kara moved like lightning, her body a blur of motion, but even she was slowing, even she was bleeding. More poured in from the western gate, and Jace hit the overload switch, detonating the outer mines. The floor shook as smoke filled the holes. Kara stumbled, and Jace caught her before she hit the ground, her hands shaking, her lips bloody. She looked at him and whispered, I can't see straight. I think I'm losing it. Jace pulled her behind a support beam, shielded her with his body, and said, just hold on, I've got one more idea. He ran to the command console as another wave slammed against the front doors. Kara tried to follow, but collapsed near the center console. Her fingers curled around the floor, her eyes blinking slowly, as if every breath was now a war. Jace activated the fusion core override, channeling all remaining power into the pulse grid. The base lights flickered, then turned red, the hum of energy rising like a storm beneath their feet. Kara crawled to him, tried to stop him, but he grabbed her wrist and said, if this fails, we both go out in light, not in fear. She didn't speak, just stared at him, the way someone looks when words mean nothing anymore. Then she leaned in close, pressed her forehead against his, and whispered, I'm not letting you go, not this time, not ever. The doors broke open, and the creatures flooded in dozens, maybe hundreds, a tidal wave of black and red, and shadows. Jace hit the final switch, and the base erupted in a sphere of white light so bright it swallowed the night, so loud it silenced the screams. The walls shook, the sky cracked, and everything disappeared in fire and wind. Then there was silence again, not like before, not empty but full. The silence after something ends or something begins. Kara lay still next to Jace, his body still warm, her fingers gripping his sleeve, her breath shallow but steady. Outside, the snow had started falling again, soft and slow, like the planet was breathing again, like the monsters had finally stopped watching. The smoke drifted across the valley like ghosts trying to find their way home. Ash rained down over the battlefield, where metal met earth and fire met silence. Nothing moved at first, not the broken drones, not the shattered walls, not the sky that still hung heavy with gray clouds. Then a soft breath broke through the stillness, shallow and strained, followed by the sound of shifting rubble. Jace opened his eyes, barely able to see, barely able to think. His chest felt like it had been crushed by a starship, and every limb screamed with pain, but the weight against his side was real, and warm, and clinging to him like life itself. Kara stirred slowly, her head resting on his chest, her fingers tangled in the remains of his jacket. Her eyes opened just enough to see him breathing, and she didn't speak, just let out a single breath of relief that said more than words ever could. The explosion had worked. The pulse grid had overloaded just enough to burn through the wave of shadows. before they could consume the bunker, but the cost was high. The base was gone, the systems offline, the valley torn open like a wound. Jace coughed and tried to sit up. Kara helped him, her hands bruised, but steady, her face marked with ash and blood, but her eyes clear and fierce like they had been reborn in the fire. She looked around, taking in the wreckage, the bodies, the silence, and then she looked at him and whispered, "They're gone, really gone." He nodded and smiled, though it hurt his face. To do it, they limped out of the wreckage together, step by step, their movements slow but in sync. The snow had begun to fall again, gentle and soft, covering the burn marks and broken steel like the planet was trying to heal itself. Kara stopped at the edge of the ridge and looked down at the valley where the last of the enemy had vanished. Nothing remained, no red eyes, no black mist, just quiet ground and open sky. She turned to Jace, her voice low and calm. "I never asked you why you stayed, even when I told you to leave, even when I pushed you away." Jace looked at her, his breath fogging the cold air, and said, "Because I saw you, not the armor, not the anger, but the person inside who deserved to be saved." Even if she didn't believe it, Kara stared at him for a long moment, her eyes unreadable. Then she stepped forward and pulled him into a slow, tired embrace, her arms around his back, her cheek against his shoulder. No pride, no fear, just something raw and real. They found a small ridge shelter where the emergency beacon still blinked. Weak but functional, Jace set up the transmitter while Kara kept watch, her spear resting on her lap, her eyes scanning the horizon, not for enemies, but for the rescue ship that would come days later. They ate rations, shared water, and spoke little, but when they did, it was not about war, not about pain. Just simple things like stars and stories, and how silence could be a kind of python. The third night, Kara sat beside him, her legs stretched out, her body relaxed for the first time since he met her, and she said, "I don't want to go back to how I was cold, alone, pretending strength meant silence, pretending love was weakness." Jace looked at her, his hand resting near hers, and said, "You don't have to, not anymore, not ever again." She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, her fingers brushing his arm, and whispered, "I hated you when you arrived, because you reminded me of everything I lost, but now I think you're the only thing I want to keep." The rescue team came at dawn, a bright blue ship, cutting through the clouds like a blade. Kara and Jace stood together, watching it descend, its engines kicking up snow and dust. The door opened, and officers stepped out, calling their names. But Kara didn't move right away. She turned to Jace and said, "Once we get back, I want you to come with me, not as a soldier, not as a bodyguard, but as the man who stayed when I tried to fight the whole world alone." Jace smiled and reached for her hand. This time she didn't pull away. This time she held on as the ship lifted off, carrying them away from the battlefield. Kara sat by the window, watching the valley disappear into the clouds, her hand still holding their shadows cast on the steel wall beside them, not separate, not distant, not warrior and outsider, but two survivors. Two hearts that chose to face the dark, not alone, and never again pretending not to need each other.